I can't see the chat, guys, so you will have to excuse me on that. So our first story is called The Dead Family. So over the last 7 months, I've been working for someone I responded to on Craigslist. Well, I'll just explain everything. This seems like an appropriate place to do this. I was scouring the internet for some sort of paying gig. I didn't really care what. And then I came across a post on Craigslist. I just refreshed the page, and there it was. Someone was looking for a person to come by and feed their pets. I assumed they were going out of town or something, so I contacted them and left my number through email. I got a response immediately in the form of a phone call. The caller was a man who explained to me that he was moving out of town and his parents had cats. They wanted to be fed daily and they needed watering, obviously. I gave the man my name so he could run me through a cursory background check, and in about 20 minutes, I was hired. I went there the next morning. I got all the instructions and whatnot, met the man, the one I'd spoken to on the phone. His name was Ben. Ben explained to me that he would no longer be able to care for his parents' cats, and that his parents, well, they needed to focus on themselves, so I was being brought in to take care of that. The money would be left on the kitchen table at the end of every week. $200 a week just to feed some cats. I know, right? In addition to that, money for more cat food. That would be left only if needed, of course. Then he told me the first thing that I thought was strange. I was to come at exactly 10 a.m. every day and be gone by 10:10 a.m. and I was to never, under any circumstances, interact with his parents. He told me that when I'm in their home, they will be in their chairs in the living room, watching television, and that I was not to disturb them ever. He asked if any of that would be a problem, to which I assured him it wouldn't. He then showed me the area in which the cats eat. There were 4 cats. And he showed me where the food was kept. While not rude in the least, he was very adamant that I not explore further in the house, to which I assured him that wouldn't be a problem. He ushered me outside and showed me where the spare key was in case the door was ever locked. But he told me that was very unlikely to happen. And with that, he expressed his hope that I could be trusted. Shook my hand, and I told him that I'd be there at 10 a.m. every day starting tomorrow. If I was unable to make it, I would call and leave a message on their home phone, to which they obviously gave me the number so I could do that. I shook my head on the way out, thinking this is very strange, but £200 a week to feed some cats, you know? The next day came. I went inside at exactly 10 a.m. I walked into the house, and immediately to my right were Ben's parents, sitting in recliners, facing away from me, watching some kind of game show. I announced my presence, which they ignored, and then I made my way to the kitchen. I fed the cats, and then I left. The exact same scenario played out countless times over the next months. 10 a.m., unreturned hello, feed the cats, leave. On Fridays, I would pick up the small stack of $20 bills from the kitchen table. It was the easiest job I ever had. Then came the inevitable one day. I was running late. I got to the house at 10:08. I entered and apologized to Ben's parents for being so late, to which I once again got no response. They just kept sitting in their chairs, watching the game show. I went to the kitchen, fed the cats. I looked at my phone, which read 10:11. Walked down the hall towards the front door. When I reached the living room, I jumped and gasped out of shock. Ben's parents were now standing in the dark behind their chairs, completely still, staring at me. I apologized for running late and got out of there. Though unnerved, I went back the next day on time and everything was fine. A few more months went by of nothing strange, and then came the last day I was there. I got there at 10:03, but I wasn't worried because I knew I could be out before, obviously, 10:10. The problem came when I was in the kitchen and I heard someone whisper the words, "Help me." It startled me, and I jumped, looking around for the source of the cry for help. I saw no one around, but I heard it again, and then a third time. I began looking around before realizing I was running behind. I looked at my phone and it was 10:10. My heart sank to my stomach. When I looked down the hallway, well, I saw Ben's parents for the first time in the light. They were grossly emaciated and pale, looking completely malnourished. They were essentially walking skeletons. I apologized for taking so long and said I'd be on my way, but they just stood there, blocking the way to the front door. I said I would take the back door, which was located in the kitchen, but when I went to open it, it required a key from the inside. Seriously. It was at this point that true panic set in. I looked behind me. The parents were now about half a foot away from the entrance to the kitchen, and I had nowhere else to go, except what I presumed was a door to the pantry. They had blank stares across their faces, and their eyes looked as if, well, their soul had left them a long time ago. In a last-ditch effort, I went to the door that I thought was the pantry and found it led to a staircase leading into a basement, which, of course, no light. As soon as I opened the door, there was a horrid stench that washed over the otherwise clean air I was standing in. I carefully went down the stairs and looked for a window, but they were all nailed shut. I happened to look back up the stairs, and the parents were now standing next to each other at the top of the stairs. It was truly horrifying. I pulled out my phone and called 911, not knowing what else to do. When I explained my situation, they said they would send a car out immediately and to stay on the phone while they connected me to the en route unit. I ran into the dark basement using my phone as a light. It didn't provide too much illumination since I was in the middle of a call, but it was just enough. There were racks of junk that lined the basement, separating it into almost aisles. I went down to check if any of the windows were possibly loose, like I'd be that lucky. Then I turned around and shined the light in front of me, and I was inches away from the parents. Lifeless looking faces. I let out a scream, ran in the other direction, and tripped over something, sending my phone flying from my hand, of course. It landed face down, so I couldn't find it. I ran back up the stairs and into the kitchen, looking back and seeing the parents standing at the bottom of the stairs, with slight grins on their faces. I ran down the hall to the front door and I flung it open, screaming when I saw the cop standing right in front of me. He asked me if I was the one that called as I pushed past him to get outside, and I told him I was. I looked in the window and saw the parents sitting in their chairs, watching the game show. I explained that these crazy old people had trapped me in their house and were chasing me around. The cop went in to talk to the parents and look around while I sat in the cop car. He came back after 5 minutes later and asked if I was sure someone was chasing me. I said yes, I was obviously sure, but that it was the two old people that lived there. He informed me that the people that lived there, the people in the chairs, had been dead for quite some time. I asked what the smell was in the basement, and he said there was another body down there. Backup showed up. I gave them my statement and explained how I'd been coming every day for months and months to feed the cats. I told them to call Ben, the homeowner's son. I gave them the number, and it was disconnected. I found out a few days later that the body in the basement was Ben. What I don't get is who's been paying me? Who would have been paying? Who knows? Thank you, guys. The next story is School had a lockdown. This last May, my high school had a lockdown. I was homesick at the time, so my knowledge of the events that happened that day come mostly from what I heard through administrators, classmates after the incident, and, well, the text messages I received during it. The administrators haven't disclosed much information about the situation, which is only making the rumours worse. After a few months of trying to make sense of all this, I'm just tired and confused. Maybe someone out there reading this or hearing this can finally help me. I'll try to provide as much background information as I can in order for this to make sense. I've been texting my best friend Andrew all day while vegging out on my bed with Netflix playing in the background. He first texted me about the lockdown at 11:27 a.m., which means he would have been in fourth house Spanish class. Being that the seniors had just graduated, his class was quite small, only 6 students besides him in it. Below are some of the texts we sent to each other. Starting the day at 11:27. Andrew, dude, holy shit. Andrew, Lindsay, Andrew, reply, Lindsay. Lindsay, what? Andrew, the school just went into lockdown. Lindsay, like a drill or what? Andrew, I think it's for real. The PA came on during class and said, students and administrators, please go into level 3 lockdown procedure. This is not a drill. Like, everyone's in the corner. Lindsay, wait. Level 3? Doesn't that mean someone's in the building? Shit, man, I'm shaking now. The school better not be playing with you all. Andrew, it's so quiet now. There isn't a sound in the entire building. This it doesn't seem like they're faking it. Lindsay, I just told my mum. She hasn't heard anything about it yet. Andrew, wait. I can hear someone walking down the hallway. Probably the office people coming to let us out. Lindsay, what if it's not though? Andrew, seriously, stop. Lindsay, you asshole. Lindsay, sorry. You probably have nothing to worry about though, man. Andrew, I can hear them going down the hallway, turning all the door handles. Lindsay, yeah, that's what they do during a drill. Make sure the teachers, well, sort of lock them up properly. Andrew, they're talking. Yeah, then it's definitely the administrators. Andrew, no, it doesn't make any sense. It's all gibberish. I don't think it's even in English. What the hell? Lindsay, Andrew, you guys are okay though, right? Your door is locked, lights off. Have they gone in any of the classrooms? Andrew? Hello? Andrew, my mum isn't answering. Someone next to me is crying. He's outside my classroom. Lindsay, don't make a sound, okay? Andrew, did he leave? Hello? Andrew! Andrew, hello, please text me back. Andrew. He never responded. From what I've been told, the school eventually came out of lockdown. When they went around each classroom to check in, Andrew's classroom door was still locked. They called out to the people inside. They received no response back. Firefighters eventually knocked the door down. When they got in, there was nobody inside. The whole classroom was empty. Officials have offered no explanation as to where they are. Or what happened? I guess most people in town eventually moved on, shifted their attention elsewhere. It seems as though nobody even cares anymore, but I still do. I need answers. I need to find, I need to find my best friend. And that is that story. The next one is called the NES Player, the NES game. Have you heard the story of the secret NES game ladder to Oblivion by Wax Shepherd? The internet says there are 91 unlicensed NES games, but I know that's not true. There's one more, and I've seen it. It's real. At the end of the story, I'll show you a picture of it. By then, you'll understand why I never play it. But first, the backstory. As you probably know, the Nintendo released its Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, in North America in 1986. It created a worldwide phenomenon. It had already sold over 2.5 million units in Japan, and the success of the system in America single handedly revitalized the struggling video game industry by 1990. 30% of American households owned the NES, beating the percentage that owned personal computers by 7%. Mine was one of those households. I remember my dad bringing the NES home for the first time. He was beaming with pride. I was in complete awe. I remember sitting in our sunken living room and playing Super Mario Bros. For hours upon hours, never sitting too close to the television for fear that my eyes would be damaged. That's what my mum said, at least. What I didn't know then, that making games on the NES was big business. Part of the reason the NES was so successful is because Nintendo actively courted third-party developers before its fledgling system. And because it possessed a near monopoly on the video game market, it was able to enforce its standards and policies with an iron fist. So much so that the United States Department of Justice actually started looking into Nintendo business practices. When the FTC got involved, Nintendo changed some of the strict terms of its agreements. By Nintendo's count, there are 671 licensed games with an S. That list grows to 677 if you include the three Tengen games that were only temporarily licensed. Plus the several others like Miracle Piano, which was left off Nintendo's list. To enforce its licensing standards, Nintendo created the 10NES. That was a chip. When the chip in the system detected the chip in the game pack, the game would be playable. Otherwise, no dice. As you can imagine, many companies either, didn't want to pay the licensing fee or were rejected as official license partners by Nintendo based on the quality of their games. Hence the 91 unlicensed games. You can see a list of them, by the way, they're out there. To skirt the protection of the 10NES chip, some companies configured their hardware to create a several millisecond voltage spike that short circuited the chip for just a moment and allowed the game to be played. Interesting stuff, right? I thought so. And so did my dad. He worked for Nintendo, and he worked in their department of licensing. The late 80s, early 90s. And he got to experience all of this as it happened. But the story of the ladder to oblivion does not begin with my dad. It begins with Rob, the founder and original president of LTO LLC, and his idea for a new video game. Rob was in his senior year at West Lafayette High School in Indiana when Mario Bros. Was released for the NES. Like thousands of other kids around the country, he became obsessed pretty quickly. When Rob graduated, he decided to attend Purdue University to study computer science. He wanted to make video games. Purdue's company science department moved into a newly renovated building in the fall of 1985, and Rob took full advantage of it when he started college the next year. 4 years later, he graduated at the top of his class, with honours. My dad told me Rob was one of the smartest people he'd ever met. Even so, Rob dealt with some personal demons. His mother raised him alone after his father was murdered in a home invasion when he was young. His mother was home when it happened, but her life was spared. The resulting trauma sent her, well, careening through the years. Alcoholism, depression. Rob was neglected, as you can imagine, and eventually went into the custody of the Child Protective Services. He acted out at first, but eventually rose above the shitty hand he'd been dealt. When Mario Bros came out his senior year, he found it to be the escape he'd been seeking. My dad has told me the story about the day he first met Rob a dozen times. It was May 25th, 1992. You remember the date because the Friday prior was Johnny Carson's final Tonight Show, and Jay Leno was announced as the new host that Monday. Johnny wanted Letterman to replace him, he said. Every time. Not that Leno fella. That Monday, he was sitting at his desk when the phone rang. The voice on the other side hesitated for a moment. How'd you like to be rich? The man said. My dad had heard the version of that question 100 times and typically hung the phone up immediately when he heard it. This time was different. Something in the man's voice intrigued him. I'd love to, he joked. Do you have a secret winning lottery numbers? The man didn't laugh. I've got something even better, he said. And what's that? My dad shot back. A new type of game, one the world has never seen before. I'm listening, my dad continued. Rob introduced himself as the president of LTO LLC, a game company. At the time, my dad had no idea Rob was the only member. Rob went on to describe the game he was working on. It was a platform game where the main character moved across the screen from left to right, collected items and power ups, and fought enemies. At the end of each level, there would be a boss, with an ultimate boss at the end of the game. My dad explained that Nintendo already had a game like that. It was called Mario Bros. My dad said, Rob told him, the differences were in the details. The game would start with a young man who finds a strange wooden ladder protruding out of the ground. When he climbs down the ladder, he realizes he can't go back up again. The only way is forward. And at the end of each level, the young man must fight a demon who appears in some form of someone from his past. It could be a teacher, a parent, or a friend. But the player would find out it was always someone who had harmed the main character in the past. After defeating the demon, the player climbs down to the next level. There would be 9 levels total. In each, the screen, it would become darker and the enemies more powerful. By the ninth level, Rob explained, the player would barely be able to see his way through the darkness. And at the very end, the ultimate boss appears. The player finally learns who he's been fighting to reach the entire time, a mirror image of himself. Defeating the boss reveals a new ladder that leads back up to the surface. What happens when the player fails? My dad asked. You don't want to know, Rob said, cryptically. Can you tell me what it's called? Ladder to Oblivion? Rob almost whispered eventually. He convinced my dad to meet him in order to show him this game. It wasn't quite finished yet, but the first 7 levels were playable. I was mesmerized. My dad told me the game made me feel like no game had ever before. The bosses at the end levels, I started seeing them as people in my life who had wronged me. A teacher in 4th grade who humiliated me in front of class. An old high school friend that had stolen my girlfriend. It almost felt like that, game changed, depending on who was playing it. When my dad brought the game to Nintendo, they refused to approve the LTO LLC as an officially licensed developer. Nintendo had very strict rules about this and the type of content that their partners could include in their games. No nudity, no gore, no cursing, no religious symbols, among others. Ladder to Oblivion theme and content, well, this didn't fall under the recognised restrictions, but it was rejected anyway. It's too dark, was the only explanation given. Rob was crushed, my dad said. Understandably so. He'd worked on Ladder to Oblivion for the better part of 3 years. My dad told me the day of the final rejection was the last time he'd ever spoken to Rob. He never saw him again. I begged him several times to try and get in touch with Rob. I did, begged him. Maybe he still had a copy of the game, that we could play it together. Maybe, he'd say, averting his eyes. I'll see if I can dig up his number. I believed my dad all these years. For all I knew, the story of Ladder to Oblivion, the NES game, that never was, ended the day my dad said it did. Yesterday I found out I was wrong. It's hard to even type this, but yesterday, my dad, he took his own life. It was a shock to my entire family. He seemed happy and never acted depressed or anything. My mother found him in the woods behind our house. He'd used a gun, obviously. I was devastated. I still am. Last night, I went to the one place where I felt closest to my dad, his study. We spent hours in there together playing old NES games and reliving his days at Nintendo. On a whim, I ended up grabbing Mario Bros. Out of its case. I was going to play a final game in honor of Dad. When I flipped the door open, I found there was already a game inside. My dad never left games inside the console. He said it made them wear out quicker. It was Ladder to Oblivion. The art was just how I'd pictured it all those years ago, an 8-bit image of a ladder descending into a raging fire. A note was taped, yes, taped, to the back. The note contained the real story of Ladder to Oblivion, the NES game that did not come to be. I considered transcribing the entire thing, but realized that would be disrespectful towards my dad. The note was addressed directly to me. He'd meant the words within for my eyes only. Plus, the words are dark. They aren't a proper representation of my dad at all. I hope you don't mind that I paraphrase. The day of the rejection, my dad went and saw Rob. He was already obsessed with Allowed to Oblivion. After a lengthy discussion, Rob asked my dad to join LTO LLC as a partner. It was Rob's plan all along, obviously. And the reason he'd asked my dad at the beginning if he wanted to be rich. Together, they complete Ladder to Oblivion and release it as an unlicensed game. My dad knew all about Nintendo's authentication chip and how to work around it. They both understood that many of the companies that produced unlicensed games like Tenga and Ataris, the software branch, and Color Dreams, Bunch Games, Wisdom Tree, they changed their name every so often so people would forget about how crappy their previous games were. Actually did very well in the market. They knew the risk that Nintendo could come up with a solution that would lock Light to Oblivion out of the nest forever, but were willing to take it. Of course, my dad would be a silent partner. He still needed his job at Nintendo. It's what paid the bills after all. In 7 months, Rob finished Ladder to Oblivion. The two were ecstatic, but their joy would be short-lived. The night Rob completed the game, he called my dad and told him it was finally finished. My dad was so excited beyond measure. The next day, my dad had the game loaded onto two pre-production cartridges. He had a friend in the art department with the label, and this was complete with Nintendo's seal of quality. That way, they think he was working on something for the company. Once they were ready for a large production run, he'd have them made off site. He didn't want to take any chances. Rob told him not to play the game yet. He still needed to do a complete playthrough from start to finish to catch any remaining bugs. My dad reluctantly agreed. Rob agreed to call him when he finished so he could meet my dad and do a playthrough with him. 5 days later, my dad showed up at Rob's house and announced. He hadn't talked to Rob since the phone call, and, well, he was, let's say, paranoid. He was worried Rob had decided to release the game on his own cut my dad out of the profits. What he found was much worse. Rob was dead. It was assumed he took his own life, but the note is unclear. There's a lot of rambling at this part about God and the devil, and a lot of sentences have been scribbled over so heavily. The words are mostly illegible. It looks like Rob left a note, but the only words were never climb the ladder. More scribbled out words. And at the end of the page, my dad writes, he finally faced himself. My dad moved on undeterred. Didn't seem to bother him. He was terribly upset though at Rob's death, but the game had taken control of his life. Ever since he played it for the first time, he said, he'd been battling a secret depression. The only thing he believed would make him happy again was to release Ladder to the public. The very next day, my dad brought on a new partner, a friend from Purdue named Eddie, who was always looking for business opportunities. That night, they got together to play the game. My dad started, but ended up leaving after the seventh level to grab some pizza. When he returned, he found Eddie dead. Game over, flashing on the screen. Eddie had taken his own life. The note gets harder and harder to read, but I think he carved something into his arm. UXXYINXXXE. I'm not sure what that means. He says at that point he was convinced the game was responsible for Rob's and Eddie's deaths, as well as the worsening depression. He took the game away, vowing never to play it again. He couldn't bear to get rid of it, though. I was 5 at the time. I obviously don't remember any of this happening, but I do remember us moving around that time. My dad quit his job at Nintendo, and we moved out of town. For 24 years, my dad kept his promise. He never played ladder all the way through until yesterday. This is the end of the note here. You can draw your own conclusions. I, for one, believe my dad, no matter what you all might say. And my dad never told me what happened to Rob's copy. For all I know, it's still out there. Have you seen it? Here's what my dad wrote. 24 years of guilt finally caught up to me today. I climbed the ladder, something I said I'd never do. I faced myself, and I was judged unworthy. Just like Rob, just like Eddie, there's something wrong with the ladder. Almost like consciousness. It's more than just the sum of its parts. It looks deeper inside you, too deep for light. To the places you didn't know existed, son. I don't want to die. I XXXX to live. But my shotgun is sitting on the floor beside me and I can hear it speaking to me. It sounds XX sweet. Its voice is an XXX in song. If I can ignore it, I'll tear up this letter and you'll see the difference. I'm sorry I lied. XXXXX. I'm sorry, XXXX. Lot of things. Please know the title of you. XXXXX. Move on. I'm going outside. I can't. XXXX it. Please. And that's the end of that story. Now, that is a very weird story because it's regarding some sort of game. I don't know, like for the old Nintendos. Very, very strange. Very strange story indeed. This story is someone in my house. This all happened about 3 hours ago. I moved back with my mother almost 2 weeks ago due to my lease ending at my apartment and my girlfriend and I splitting up a month before the end date. She took the new place we had looked at together. I mean, since she obviously had put down the security deposit and paid everything up front, I didn't have any say in the matter. My mother offered to let me stay in her spare bedroom for a month or two while I got back on my feet and, save so I can get my own place. This was a disaster waiting to happen, and my mother and I don't live well together. Without any opinions on such short notice, I took her up on the offer and moved in. It's a small townhouse tucked away from the main roads, about 5 minutes away from everything of interest. It heats up like a sauna during the day, so I didn't spend much time there, unless it was evening time. And, well, my day off. And thankfully, I work from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., so I don't bear the brunt of the heat. Mum works from 5 a.m. to 4 p.m. herself, and she's usually going to bed by the time I'm home. And the less interaction we have, the less chance we butt heads. But that'll change tonight. 2 weeks in my mother's house, and I've lived surprisingly well. Well, with each other we have at least. Which is far from when I was in high school and growing up. She asked if I would go to the store with her, since it was finally cooling off. Most people don't crowd grocery stores at night, and she needed help carrying a few things she needs to buy. Not like my company, well, would have been nice or anything. No big deal. I couldn't argue with her letting me stay rent free, so why not? I offered to drive, so she left her keys in the house. My smart ass left mine too, and it was a reflex to twist the lock on the knob when you walked out. We both realized once we got my car that neither of us had keys. Great time for our first flight in a while, right? After we cleared up the way to go on forgetting your keys, and I knew I shouldn't have asked for your help bullshit, she tried calling a landlord to see if she wouldn't come and lock the house with a spare key. While she did that, I walked around to the front door, you know, see if by some miracle it was unlocked, but no luck. The landlord is out of town. That's what we found out. So we called the landlord's son to see if he has a spare, and he doesn't either. Awesome. Thankfully, my mother has a back deck with furniture, and I had my cigarettes, so we called a locksmith and decided to wait it out. Now, to describe things a bit, the townhouse is 2 stories. From the table and chairs on the back porch, you're about 10, 12 feet away from the back door, and the spare bedroom overlooks the whole back area. After a few more minutes of complaining at each other, we sit in silence, and my eyes start to wander through the window of the spare room. It's about 9:15 p.m. It's still decently light outside. I can see everything fairly well, and I see the blinds start swaying lightly. At first I thought I was crazy, didn't say anything. I thought it out and remembered I left my fan on. It rotates. It'll cover the whole bedroom. That's regularly going to blow the blinds a bit, right? Then when I start talking about work, friends, life in general, I catch the blinds moving out of the corner of my eye again. But this time, one of them is held up. I make out a distinct shape of a face. I stand up, walk over to the side of the house to try and get a better angle, but the blinds slid back into place as soon as I moved. It's about 9:30 at this point. My mother keeps asking me what I'm doing, why I'm pacing the yard. I'm thoroughly freaked out, and I'm convinced that someone was in the house, in my room, watching down at us. Despite my better judgment, I don't tell my mum. Instead, I come sit back down, act as natural as possible, and wait to see if I'm not slowly going crazy like my dad did before he ran out on us. In consecutive 5-minute intervals, I glanced up at the window to see if there was any more movement. By 9:40, well, my mum's getting cranky as hell, waiting for the locksmith, and started laying into me again about forgetting the keys. I'm so far away from giving a shit. It's dark outside, and we didn't leave any outside lights on, so it's getting darker and I'm already creeped out. The only lights in the house that were left on when we left was the living room and the dining room. My bedroom light was off, and at 9:45, when the locksmith finally showed up, I looked up at my window again, and the light was now on in the spare room. The locksmith unlocks the back door. My mum grabs a debit card and pays him, and I beat her to the front door just before she can go in. I tell her to wait for me to check things out, and before she can start complaining, I tell her, Mum, I saw someone through the window while we were waiting for the locksmith. Colour drains out of her face, and I step inside, grab the keys from the counter where I left them, right inside the door, and I shut the door. We walk over to my car, parked about 50 foot away on the street, and I retrieve my pistol. I always conceal carry. I have one firearm in the house, one in my vehicle at all times. My mum sits down in my car, calls 911, and I go back to the house armed and ready to deal with whoever was in there. I checked every room, inside every cupboard and drawer, the bathrooms and closets, and finally my room. Nothing. No one is hiding anywhere, and I'm starting to think I'm actually nuts for a second. Until I check my bedroom closet and find my second gun missing. Okay, red flag. I get the hell out of Dodge at that point, come blasting down the stairs, and that's when I realize the front door is locked. That was the first thing we checked. We were locked out. Now it's not. Someone was definitely here. Cops have been called and arrive about 10 minutes. We explain what happened and obviously decide not to stay there tonight, but they checked everything out before we left. No signs of forced entry, and the only thing we could document as missing was my gun. Hmm, so what do I do from here? We're not going back to that house. I'm done sure of that. I'm spooked as hell. I'm writing this from my phone, and we're at my aunt's house, and now we have half our damn family going nuts over this too. I'm not sure how I feel. I definitely know this is not how I wanted to spend my Thursday night. Hmm. Was there someone in the house, guys? Or were they hallucinating? Could be either, right? Who knows? The next story is called Not Uber. I'm sharing this experience from literally last night because A, it's creepy as hell, at least for me, and B, I want people to learn from my experience. This is a precautionary tale. I understand that this was my fault, but maybe if I can help one person by telling my story, it's worth it. I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I will go out with my friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at the bar in the city, and they left. I was chatting up a cute guy, so I decided to stay. I went back to his place. Very satisfying, if anyone's interested. I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I don't know where I am. I know the city I'm in, but not my exact location. I order the Uber, but it's taking forever. Requesting. So I cancel it and try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble something like, "This is my Uber." I hop in. Mistake. Ubers apparently are supposed to have some kind of marking on their vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting. I'm fumbling for a cigarette. The next thing I notice is that we're headed on the highway, the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive. And we're going at a solid 90 mile per hour. Then I got a call from my Uber driver. He's there, and I'm not. Because I am in a car. Yes, yeah. I am in a car with a nutcase. I start texting my friend frantically, counting off mile markers for her. Then I realize that's going to do jack because she's probably drunk too. So I call 911. But I realize this guy is crazy. He's refusing to let me out of the car. So I've got to do it on the sly. It's been 40 minutes now. I'm terrified. I don't know where I am. I don't know who this is. We're driving at 100 mile per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. The guy is trying to get me to hang up my cell phone. Yo, get off the phone. Who you calling? Better not be a snitch. And also smoke pot. So I don't want to do anything that might provoke him. I definitely don't want any violent reactions. I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if it's my friend, praying that he'll catch on. Hey girl, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving. Past highway exit. No, sweetie, it's not by Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. It's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends. Thanks, sweet baby Jesus, the operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends cops, and we develop a code. If I see cops, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out the window, which looks semi normal, I guess, because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex, and he busts out some powder and forms two lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which probably means he's emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator in code. Oh, girl, I wish you were here right now. This guy just busted out coke. You'd love it. He's taken a really big bump. Man after my own heart, etc. Pretty soon, I can see the lights from the cop cars, so I start waving my hands out the window. At this point, I don't care if he's onto me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, but I slump down in my seat just in case. The cops surround us, get him out of the car. Then, once it's safe, they get me out as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation. That's when my story ends. On the way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all this to the officer, I find out that the guy's 40-ish years. He's been in federal prison for 30 of them for violent offences. I want people to learn from my mistakes. And, if nothing else, call 911. Stay on the line. Yep, being drunk is stupid. I got in a car with a violent felon, and he may have been trying to kidnap me. With some quick thinking on my part and 911 dispatcher sent from the gods above, I'm okay. I don't have much way of proof, but I could show crappy texts, I suppose, sent to my friend or an hospital band. But yeah, that was totally my fault. So when you're drunk, always be sure it's the right driver. Make sure it's your taxi. Okay? I'm going to have a little break for now, guys. I hope you can hear me well, because I don't know if you can hear me or not. But I need a drink. I can see there's not many people here. I know that. There's only two people in my life. So nobody stays. Different when I'm on camera, people stay then. But if I don't put myself on camera, people don't want to stay and listen to the stories. It's a shame. So we're having a break before we go into our next story, guys. But what do you think of those stories? They were crazy, right? I mean, I get the Uber driver story because honestly, even actual proper Uber drivers, yeah, there is some crazy stories about proper Uber drivers out there also. Like, it's not just the fact you've got to be careful what car you get into and stuff. It's the fact that even if it is an Uber driver, you still got to be careful. There's some right horror stories about like Uber drivers just going nuts or doing things that are very inappropriate. So, I mean, I get that she was drunk, she made a mistake, she jumped in a car with a maniac. But at the same time, you can't always trust your Uber drivers either. There's been some right horror stories about Uber drivers in general. So that's pretty scary in itself. The game story, I found it. I'm not sure about that story about the game that I've just read. I don't know how I feel about that. I guess it's kind of quirky. I like how it's like a retro story, isn't it? Um, and it's kind of quirky for the fact that the game brings to life your real fears. It's interesting in that way. The guy who thought he saw someone in the house and his gun went missing, not sure what to think about that. I have seen something called frogging on, this is in America, and they can literally like move from house to house if they're all connected through their loft or their attic system or something like that. But I'm not sure what to make of that story. I mean, I'd be scared to go back home if if I knew someone was in the house and let's say your gun's missing and you know that someone's taken it, yeah, that I'd be scared to go back in the house too. But he said his dad were crazy. Is it just him being crazy? Did he really leave the gun in the house? Or has he just lost his mind? Who knows? It's hard to say with stories like that. And I think that's the idea. They leave you guessing at what the outcome could possibly be. Like we have to assess and sort of decide what our outcome in that story would be, you know? The one about the feeding the cats, I've heard that story before. It's an interesting story, but it's creepy because it was while feeding the cats there's dead bodies in that house, and how can you not smell the dead bodies? How can you go there for months and not realize that those people are dead? Like, surely the smell alone would tell you, right? Because death has that smell that you just know. So that story is a bit weird to me because I would think if you're going to feed these cats every day for months on end, at some point you are going to smell the decomposition. But yet you didn't smell it until you opened the basement door and found another body. It doesn't make sense like to me. If they're in the living room and they're dead bodies, you would smell death. Like, I don't that one makes no sense to me because I honestly believe you wouldn't be going in that house for months on end feeding the cats and not smell that there's death nearby. I find that quite impossible, to be honest. So my least favourite so far is definitely the computer game story, the NES. Just because it's just a bit weird and confusing. Um, I think I kind of like the Uber story best because it's quite realistic, because it can happen in real life and it does happen in real life, whereas the others not so much. You know, like I know they do happen in real life, but like for example, playing a game that really kills you, it's very rare, very very rare that would ever happen. Feeding cats for month on end with dead bodies sat in an armchair, not knowing that they're dead. I reckon that's very rare because you definitely smell it, you know? And seeing someone through the window and having an item going missing, I guess that's kind of realistic too, because that's also happened. But at the same time, it put me off because he said his dad was crazy. So I'm thinking maybe he's crazy too. I don't know. So yeah, my favorite one would be the Uber driver one because that is possible. Like it can happen for real, especially when we're drunk. That's why I don't tend to drink because drinking just makes us do stupid things that we will regret, you know. So I think that's where I stand on the story so far. I don't know how many stories is in this actual book, but um, they have been rather interesting none the least. Thank you guys for sticking there. The 4 people who have stayed, I appreciate it so much. I can't see the chat, guys, because I'm reading stories, so I can't see the chat. But whoever is there, I will check who was there, and if you need a jacket, I'll give you a jacket. When I recheck it. So we're going to move on to the next story, and this one's called Old Laptop. Last year, when I was moving from my apartment to my house, I dropped my box and my laptop, and it was damaged beyond repair. I definitely didn't have the money for a new one, so I went on Craigslist to find a cheap deal. And well, after hours of searching, I found the one that was decent, it was affordable, was a Windows 10 for only 25 bucks. I was astonished and emailed the owner right away in hopes it hadn't been bought at such a good deal. I was in luck because they miraculously hadn't sold it yet. I was ecstatic and went to pick it up. I asked the man why he was selling it so cheap, and he said his sister had recently passed away. They were cleaning out her house, so they were selling different things from her house. It didn't creep me out too much that I was using a dead person's computer, but I felt weird that they were giving up on her belongings so quickly. I brought the computer and was so excited to use it. I plugged it in right away and started loading it up after a minute. It was crazy. The computer was in perfect condition, not even a scratch, and was loading surprisingly fast. When it started up, the background popped up and it was a pitch black screen with three letters in the white that read EMX. I didn't know what it meant, but I supposed she had worked on an obscure company or something. I wondered if she had cleared her files off the computer, and being the nosy person that I am, I checked on the PC tab for files. I didn't find anything, though, nothing at all, until I checked the Documents tab. There were just three items there. The first item read, Case 322, Experiment. I clicked the first item open, and it came up with a summary of the little experiment of Case 322. Case hashtag 322 notes. Case suffers severe schizophrenia and depression, and experience frequent hallucinations and paralysis. We will be experimenting with treatments for her unique and unusual case. It should be noted that the case is extremely violent, has been speculated at most violent of all cases. Constant murder, torture, threats, surprising detail and graphic descriptions for someone at such a young age as her. That was the end of that item. I was horrified at the fact that it appeared they had given me a computer formerly used for children's neurological experiments. But being curious, though, I decided to keep reading on. Biggest mistake of my life. The second item read, Safety, Concern. Forewarned, I opened the file, and it appeared to be a list. Safety concerns of Case 322. It should be noted that those chosen for experimentation on Case 322 shall be of utmost high standard, and serious precautions must be taken. Case 322 has been involved in the following acts: the murder of her entire family, the murder of four civilians during her escape from her home, two bank robberies, over 200 death threats towards figures of authority, police, guards, doctors, therapists, teachers, school staff, and others, writing a death note to a classmate, pulling out her own hair from the roots and eating it, pulling her own teeth out and stabbing herself in the eye with it, over 20 suicide attempts. This includes everything that she could inflict on herself, attacking a police officer. As expected, this is not a full list of offences, but we are most prominent. When conducting experiments, do not leave case unattended and do not take eyes off her. Keep keys to experimentation room out of the parameters and make sure she's restrained in a straitjacket through the whole process. Have guards on duty at all times of experimentation. And that was the end of that file. I then understood they weren't dealing with a normal messed up kid. They were dealing with a serial killer. A psychopath. I was sick to my stomach at that point. Why did this woman have such a private matter on her own computer? How did family not know about this? Why was she dead? The third file read, Experiment Documentation. Day 1. Case 322. Fought and screamed until sedated. She is surprisingly strong for her stature and for being of only age 14. Experiments went well. Not much progress. Day 2. Case 322 stabbed a guard in the eye with a bobby pin. Case is no longer allowed hair utilities. Case is to have head shaved to prevent it being used as a noose or a weapon. After proper sedation, we found a serious neurological phenomenon in her brain. Most likely, this could be the cause of her issues. Day 3. Case 322 woke up from sedation during experiments and cleared his sleep as she slowly attempted to escape from restraint. Patient sprung up in the middle of experiment, tackled the doctor, and broke a hip bone before being restrained by the guards. Doctor to receive compensation. Sedation will be amped up several milligrams, and restraining methods should be more advanced. Day 4. Two guards and a nurse were killed in the escape. A building was put on lockdown. Case was found hiding in the cleaning closet. Day 5. Experiments are becoming increasingly more dangerous for the team. We are debating the end of the experiment for safety reasons. Case 322 is by far the most severely, and please excuse my improper tone, messed up and psychotic case ever speculated by our team. Day 6. Case 322 is no longer allowed fingernails. Day 7. I know I'm about to die. But if I'm going to die, I'm going to make sure these last few things are documented. She killed the rest of the team. I'm hiding in a locked office, but she is close. I can hear her footsteps. We never figured out how to treat this phenomenon. This is rarely ever possible, possibly never said in this field, but this case is absolutely helpless. There is no cure. She's a lost cause. She's picking the lock right now. If my family ever finds this, I love you guys. In case 322 is out there somewhere, she's in. Goodbye, world. IGRPDJNIDMK INBAS HVASDFZD. This is case 322. Well, that's what they call me. I killed this piece of trash. Bleach blonde waste of life. She's dead. If her family are reading this, I enjoyed banging her head against the desk until she died. I love watching the life drain from my victims. Good luck ever finding me. I'm dropping her laptop off at her house so they can't use it as evidence. I know where she lives. I'll find you too. And it ended. I shut off the computer and went straight back to the man's house. I asked him how his sister died. He seemed taken aback by the question but answered, saying she was murdered. I gave him the computer and showed him the files. We turned it into the police station, and there has been an ongoing search ever since. Everyone in the area is told to keep doors locked at all times. Keep on the lookout for the girl. She's out there, somewhere. They still haven't found her. I still have no clue what EMX is. The only thing that really still keeps me paranoid in the ending. I'll find you too. Honestly, based on the description of how crazy she is, I can't tell you that I don't believe her. I do. Ooh, that's a very creepy story indeed. Eeh, don't like that one. That would be not very nice. Anyway, guys, those are some stories to enjoy listening to before you go to bed. I am going to end now. I thank everybody for joining me, and of course, as always, many blessings.